Welcome to the IDP Plus Advice Show. I'm your host and analyst today. Ricky Rod66 is where you can find me on Twitter, on X. My name is Ricky Rodrigue. We're going to talk about snaps and playing time. We're going to talk about alignments. We're going to talk about injuries. We're going to talk about waivers and potential people you can pick up. And with that, let's get rolling. All righty. Welcome back. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go division by division, starting with the NFC. Then we'll move over to the AFC. So if you want to jump around and listen to different parts of the broadcast, that way you can do it. We'll be going once again division by division. And we're going to start off with the NFC North. Of course, the Bears were on bye this past week. So there's not really much to talk about with them, but let's jump into the Lions. Of course, the big news, Aiden Hutchinson last week suffered that gruesome leg injury and will be out for the year. So on this past Sunday, Josh Pascal is the person that picked up the majority of the snaps at defensive end. He played about 87% of the snaps. He finished with 4 tackles, including 4 solo, and he had a sack. But Josh is just not someone I would go chasing. In addition, among all the other defensive ends, no one played more than 50% except for the call-up from the practice squad, Isaac Uku, if I said that correctly, and he only had 1 assisted tackle. So we're not looking at all for any of these Lions, okay? There's a little bit fool's gold out there. Trevor Nowaski played about 25% of the snaps on either the last play of the game or second last play of the game. He actually got a snap. Don't be tricked by that. He is not someone that you want to chase. On the linebacker side of things, Alex Anzalone played 100% of the snaps as he typically does when he's injury-free. Jack Campbell played 78%. Malcolm Rodriguez played 53%. Jalen Reeves-Maybin played 17%. The rest of that linebacker mess is still this rotational thing that's going on. Even when Derek Bourne was there before he went on injury reserve, there was a lot of rotation there. Other than Anzalone, I'm not putting any of these other folks in my lineup and not necessarily looking to stash them on my bench, quite frankly. And in dynasty perspective, I think I'm at the point that I'm ready to trade Jack Campbell. Moving over to the Packers, Devontae Wyatt, the defensive tackle who is starting to break out, and someone I actually had on my breakout list this year for interior defensive alignment. Unfortunately, he was out with a high ankle sprain again this week. None of the other defensive tackles really stepped up to do anything, and poor Kenny Clark, we just haven't seen much from him. We're expecting so much this year from Kenny Clark in this new defense, and while the overall defense is doing well, Kenny Clark's just not putting up stats for us from an IDP perspective. Linebackers, where it gets very interesting. Quay Walker left with a concussion. If people were betting in Vegas, they would have said, well, I'm sure Isaiah McDuffie in that kind of case would have moved and put on the green dot and moved to the Mike position, and Edgerrin Cooper would have stepped into McDuffie's role. Oh, no, sir, that is not what happening, or no, ma'am, if you happen to be listening as a ma'am. It ended up being Eric Wilson, the veteran, mostly known for his special teams prowess, is the one that came in and he wore the green dot, and he was extremely productive with 6 tackles, all of which were solo, including 2 sacks. 4 of those, including those 2 sacks, were tackles for loss, and even had a pass defense. So if Quay Walker is out due to this concussion, you need a 1-week fill-in. Eric Wilson is the person that wore the green dot and jumped in that spot. I don't think that'll change. On the other hand, McDuffie and Cooper, McDuffie's snap count has continued to come down week over week. He was down to 69%. Edgerrin Cooper was down to 64%. I've been talking, if you've been watching this show for the past several weeks, I've been talking about the fact that Cooper is going to eventually replace McDuffie as we get towards later in the year, as he gets more and more experience. He missed so much time in training camp because of injuries. So McDuffie, once again, someone else I may be trying to trade, and I'm trying to stash Edgerrin Cooper. But for now, for a 1-weeker, Eric Wilson's the person to pick up. At the safety spot, Evan Williams, he jumped into the safety spot this week and played 100% of the snaps. Now, few weeks back, he played 100%. Last week, he did not, and then he jumped back to 100%. What's interesting about the whole Packers secondary, Keyshawn Nixon, who many of you have gotten IDP value from because he plays that slot cornerback position for the Packers. I should use the word played instead of plays because he's now moved to the outside position the past couple of weeks. Javon Bullard, who had been playing that combination safety slot role, played strictly the slot role, and Evan Williams took all those snaps away from Javon Bullard. Now, Bullard was a second-round pick. Williams was a fourth-round pick. Sometimes it doesn't matter when it comes to performance. So right now, Nixon on the outside really hurts his value. Bullard only played 45% of the snaps, so that hurts his value when he's not playing that combination safety slot role. And Evan Williams is someone I'm willing to pick up. Now, Evan Williams did play 65% of his snaps in a deep safety position, meaning only 35% closer to the box or in the slot area, things along those lines. So manage expectations, but he was very productive even with 65% deep. He led the team in tackles. There was a Rashawn Gary sighting. Couldn't believe it. He got his first sack since, I believe, the first week of the year. He had 5 tackles, 2 of which were solo, including that sack, but just not someone that I am ready to put into my lineup yet. He is just not performing like we expected this year. All right, let's go to the Vikings. On the Vikings side of things, Blake Cashman, who they signed as a free agent away from the Texans, is playing the Mike position. Missed last week with a toe injury, is expected to miss this Thursday's game as well with a toe injury. As a result, Ivan Pace jumped into that role, played 100% of the snaps, and as he has been very, very efficient from an IDP perspective and puts up great numbers. 10 tackles, 3 of which were solo. He had a scoop and score TD, which was beautiful. He got a sack in there. So when Cashman's not there, Pace is the man to play, and he's a top 12 linebacker, to be honest, from an IDP perspective. Now, when Cashman comes back, assuming they go back to their old roles, Pace was only playing about 30% of the snaps. So be careful how you use him going forward. But for this week, particularly with Cashman expected to be out, Ivan Pace is a man you can play. Andrew freaking Van Ginkel. We're going to talk a little bit about the edge for a second here. 7 tackles, 6 solo, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. He played 96% of the snaps, which is extremely high for an edge player. You see Max Crosby usually about 100%, and not many more around that range. But there's Van Ginkel playing those kind of snaps and being extra productive. Dallas Turner, still not playing much. 4 snaps, 7%. Dynasty, sit on him, redraft, get him out the end of your bench. He's just not going to do anything for you this year unless there's some serious injuries. Lastly, from a Vikings perspective, just want to call out Cam Bynum. That's 3 weeks in a row now that he's played less than 90% of the snaps. When you're not playing 100% of the snaps, hard to get tackles, hard to get assists, hard to get past defenses, and all. Particularly from a safety perspective, you want to be in that 90 to 100% range, and he's been below that. So Bynum is someone I'm not necessarily rushing to play right now. I'm not dropping him yet, but be careful about playing Bynum. Let's move to the NFC East, ladies and gentlemen, and let's go to the Commanders. Dorrance Armstrong, who is really showing some signs of life in the past couple of weeks, ruled out with a rib injury. Dante Fowler, who isn't playing a ton of snaps necessarily, but has been ultra productive during this time. Of course, you probably saw it very early in the game. I think I could have intercepted that pass. Andy Dalton threw it directly to Fowler. He intercepted and ran it back in for a touchdown. He also got a sack as well. So he's got a little bit of a renaissance going right now. That Dan Quinn defense in both Armstrong and Fowler played with Quinn in Dallas, and now is with them in Washington. So as the year progresses, I like both of these players. So those 2 people to target and keep an eye on. Now, the other thing about the Commanders, the Panthers was so bad, the Commanders defense was only on the field for 43 snaps. General game, roughly 65. So that's about a third of the game they missed. So it's going to be hard for your Commanders players in that particular game to put up a ton of counting stats, as I like to say, IDP stats, when you're not on the field that much. Of course, the Cowboys were on a bye last week, so let's jump to the Giants now. Shout out to Big Sexy Dexter Lawrence. A lot of people said Chris Jones is going to be the number 1 defensive tackle this year with Aaron Donald retiring and all, but it's hard to say that any defensive tackle, interior defensive lineman, whatever you want to call it, is outperforming Sexy Dexy. So he had, once again, 5 tackles, all of which are solo. two sacks. I mean, pretty amazing job by Dexter Lawrence. In addition, with Kayvon Thibodeau being out and injured, um, he was replaced by Azeez Ojulari. So always had, sorry, I stutter. Sometimes I get BJ, then Azeez, the brothers mixed up. BJ is on injured reserve with the Cardinals. Azeez is the one with the Giants. Azeez has always been known for his pass rushing capability. It was his run stopping there was a worry. But once again, this week he comes up with 3 tackles. But when I say once again, he came up with a sack this past week. So 3 tackles and a sack, particularly in leagues where you're rewarded heavily for big plays like sacks. Azeez is someone that you can go with. Jason Pinnock only played 77% of the snaps. I'm guessing, I haven't been able to verify this. I've been doing some research, haven't seen it yet, that he left with an injury. Dane Belton stepped in for him, as he typically does when this happens. So keep an eye on the injury reports related to Jason Pinnock. And Belton might be someone in deep leagues that you, if you're in a desperate situation, you pick up. And then what the hell happened to Bobby Okereke this year, folks? Granted, new defensive coordinator, you always got to worry about that new defensive system, but he is just falling off the map. He is playing 100% of the snaps, but the productivity in terms of just tackles and assisted tackles just is not there. I don't think you can afford to keep on playing Okereke, folks. I'm not dropping him yet, but because you probably invested a high draft pick in him from a linebacker perspective, particularly in these deeper leagues, and all that play a lot of linebackers. I'm putting him on the bench. I'm trying not to play him right now, folks. So that's the scoop on that's my thoughts on Okereke. Let's go ahead and move on to the Eagles now. And excuse me real quick while I'm changing my cheat sheet notes a little bit. Of course, Devin White got released from the linebacker position. They paid him $3.5 million to be a starting linebacker, and that didn't happen. Nakobe Dean and Zach Bond both outplayed him. And while they've been talking about ankle injury, and then there was some personal whatever, I think he was been, hate to say it as a former LSU guy, but was like, if I'm not starting, let me go, release me. And so that's exactly what they did. So now this Eagles game against the Giants was a complete blowout. The defense only played 58 snaps. They didn't play close to the 65. And then on top of that, at around the 84% mark of the game in terms of defensive snaps, almost every Eagles starter came out. So you can see a lot of their top players only played about 84% of the snaps this past week. That obviously hurt some of their counting stats, except for the fact that Giants O-line was so bad with Andrew Thomas being out, they gave up 8 freaking sacks on that few snaps, which is just really bad for the Giants O-line. And on Tuesday, I see why they brought in DJ Humphries for a visit and maybe to replace Thomas, who went on IR and is out for the year. So what's interesting too on the linebacker core, Nakobe Dean is now getting more productivity from a tackles perspective than Zach Bond is. Nakobe Dean is also wearing the green dot now. Early in the year, that was kind of flipped with Zach Bond being so much more productive and wearing the green dot. Those things have flipped. Haven't been able to study to see what might be different between those two linebacker positions, how they might be utilized slightly different. But right now, as we look forward, Nakobe Dean over Zach Bond, even though depending on your scoring system, you might look at the total scores and total points for the linebacker position. Bond might be a little bit higher, but I want Dean for the rest of the year. Jalen Carter, just a quick shout out with 4 tackles and 2 sacks for him. And last thing in the secondary, Cooper DeJean, second week in a row, he's played basically all the snap slots. So he played 91% of the total snaps 1 week ago. This week he didn't play as many because once again the blowout, and they didn't play as they took some of their starters out, including Cooper DeJean. So he also has the bonus of having return yards for those that have return yardage leagues, and also he did have some punt return yards. So he is someone that I am looking to target and play specifically when the team that the Eagles play in plays a lot of 11 personnel on offense, which means 1 running back, 1 tight end, and then 3 wide receivers for people that aren't familiar with that context. So Cooper DeJean, you heard it here, pick him up for cornerback required leagues. Moving to the NFC South, the Tampa Bay Bucks. You wouldn't believe it, but the Ravens scored 5 touchdowns passing last night. I believe it was 6 touchdowns total, if I remember correctly. But anyway, with all of that offense, so the Bucks were only on the field for 59 snaps. Before the game, Jamel Dean was rolled out and he was actually put on IR. That means Tyler freaking Funderburk. Love that name, Funderburk. That's a great name. Maybe not a great cornerback because there's 5 touchdowns that went through the air. So with that, the Bucs could be someone that's maybe being targeted for the next few weeks with Jamel Dean out. Kalijah Cansey played 73% of the snaps in his second game back and was extremely productive with 5 tackles and 3 solo, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. Last week, he only played 63% of the snaps. Cansey was another one, along with Devontae Wyatt, that I had as a target for a breakout at the interior defensive line / defensive tackle position. So if he is on your wire, I am definitely picking up Kalijah Cansey. At the linebacker position, KJ Britt once again played 100% of the snaps next to Levante David. Of course, earlier than the year, before Servasia Dennis went on IR, they were alternating between rundowns and passing downs between those two of them. But surprisingly, Britt stayed on the field for all 100% of the snaps. So anyway, so while that is happening, you can use Britt. When you hear Servasia Dennis is coming back from IR, temper your expectations, pull Britt out of your starting lineup. One other thing to watch, Jordan Whitehead only played 75% of the snaps. That's another one I didn't get a chance to check into. Was there an injury or something along those lines? Watch the injury report this week if you have Whitehead in your lineup and on your team. On the Falcons side of things, Lorenzo Carter, the edge, was put on IR. There's nothing else behind him on the Falcons that I would be picking up. And Matthew Judon, who they traded for, has been a complete disappointment in terms of generating the pass rush that the Falcons were hoping for. Maybe it's that age. I'm about 32 years old, Matthew Judon. Maybe the Patriots snookered the Falcons getting that 3rd-round pick in the preseason. Or maybe it's just the scheme that the Falcons are using versus the Patriots. Regardless, Judon's not productive. I'm cutting bait on Judon at this point in time if you haven't already. At the linebacker position, Troy Anderson is expected to practice on Wednesday. Caden Ellis and Nate Landman played 100% of the snaps. So with Troy Anderson coming back, I think there's a high risk of a platoon between Landman and Anderson. I think eventually Anderson will take over for Landman because he's just the better talent overall. But I think in the short term, there'll be some platoon. I think Caden Ellis is safe as the green dot, will continue to play the 100%. But that's what to be careful of in the linebacker spot. If Anderson was somehow dropped or is available in your league, grab Troy Anderson. You want him on your team. Moving on to the Panthers. The Panthers were on the field for a very nice 69 snaps. They also released Troy Hill this week. Does that mean they're going to start looking to get rid of some of their older players, give them maybe opportunities to go somewhere else? And does that create opportunity for some of the younger folks? So while Troy Hill was released, one of their draft picks, I believe it was a 5th rounder, if I remember correctly, Charles Smith-Wade, played 57% of the snaps and was very productive with 8 tackles and 5 solo. However, do not bank on that. They also activated Dane Jackson off of IR, and it's expected that Dane Jackson will move more to the starting lineup. That'll push Charles Smith-Wade back to the bench as well. And they eased Dane Jackson back in. He only played a little bit over 50% of the snaps, if I'm remembering correctly. So don't get too excited about Charles Smith-Wade. Don't jump on him because of that great 1 week. At the linebacker position, once again, Josie Jewell out. Claudin Charles also out. Of course, Shaq Thompson was on IR. So what happens? Trevin Wallace plays 100%, and Chandler Wooten, yes, Chandler Wooten, 74% of the snaps. Wooten had 6 tackles and 4 solo. You might be thinking, wow, if Jewell and Charles are out this week, Wooten might play, and if I'm deep in deep league and I'm desperate, maybe I can put in Wooten. Slow the Woot train down. Wooten was released on Tuesday afternoon. So what that means, folks, is just because you get playing time doesn't mean you're necessarily the NFL caliber player that the teams are looking for. Sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. That's what the Panthers did, and they released him. I'm also hoping that means that's a good sign that at least one of Jewell or Charles will be back this week. If that is the case, particularly Jewell, Wallace will go out of his 100% role and probably be down into the 70% range, with Jewell taking on the 100%. And of course, they were on, like I said, on the field for 69 snaps. And so With that, Trevin Wallace only had 7 tackles, of which four were solo. So for that extra volume over a typical game of about 65 snaps, and Wallace to be that unproductive, that just doesn't bode well for him, folks. Okay, moving on to the Saints. Pete Werner was out again this week. And boy, well, it looks like the whole Saints defense was gone this whole week. The Broncos just destroyed my Saints. But I won't go on a Saints rant. Let's help you with your IDPs and your teams and so forth. Willie Gay was the number 2 linebacker, played 77% of the snaps. Anthony Argy was the number 3, and he played 40% of the snaps. There's hope that Pete Werner will be back this week, which means you can say goodbye to Willie Gay. It means you could say goodbye to Anthony Argy, get rid of both of those guys, and put Werner back into your starting lineup. On the safety side of things, Will Harris was playing 100% of the snaps at safety. He went on IR. There was, well, is it going to be Jonathan Abram? Is it going to be Jordan Howden? Where it turned out to be Jordan Howden playing 100% of the snaps. Now, Howden did play about 58% of the snaps in the box and about 42% deep. So when they were playing some 2 deep with him and Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger, back deep. Howden still, with that setup, had 8 tackles for which was solo and was the leading tackler for the Saints. Although that's not saying much, which again, the way the Broncos just destroyed them. So Howden is someone that to consider picking up. They also just released on Tuesday, they being the Saints, released Jonathan Abram. So there's no competition right now. Howden is someone to pick up and potentially put directly into your lineups. In addition to the cornerback position, some good news for Alontae Taylor. Alontae Taylor is one of the top scoring cornerbacks this year, but he wasn't playing close to 100% of the snaps. He was only playing when there was someone in the slot, when the teams went to 11 personnel or 3 wide. What Dennis Allen announced is that with Paulson Adebo, another top scoring cornerback from the Saints who left in an air cast and went on IR, Dennis Allen, the head coach, said that they're going to put Alontae Taylor starting on the outside. And when they need to go to 3 cornerbacks, Taylor will move back to the slot position. Kool-Aid McKinstry, the second-round rookie out of Alabama, will move to the outside. That means Taylor will be playing close to 100% of the snaps. So that should be an additional boost for him. Slot when he was very productive, plus adding the outside cornerback tackle opportunities as well. So Taylor is someone to definitely target here as we move forward if he's not on your team, and maybe someone you could potentially trade for. You can play the card about, hey, he's going to be moving to the outside. The other thing to mention about the Saints, Marcus Lattimore left with a hamstring injury. If he is out, Rico undrafted Payton out of small school, can't remember the name of it, will be the other starting cornerback in place of Lattimore, which means he might get picked on a lot as well. They're going to be throwing on the Saints. The Saints can be run on. It's just going to be bad. The Saints are, and their offense isn't doing anything. So expect the Saints to be on the field quite a bit, probably more than typical 65 snaps. Saints IDP players, great place to go. All right, let's wrap up the NFC with going to the West now. And on the West side of things, Kaiser White returned to the starting lineup. He left last week a little bit early, and he because of an injury, but came back and did play 100% of the snaps. He had 10 tackles, 3 of which were solo, and he also had a quarterback hit. So a typical Kaiser White kind of game, maybe a couple extra assisted tackles in there. Mack Wilson, once again, played 89% of the snaps. So that's 4 weeks in a row where he's over 80% of the snaps. Bad news is it seemed like he was all over the field when you're watching the game between the Cardinals and the Chargers, but he only had 3 tackles, 1 of which was solo. So not extremely productive. The story of Mack Wilson's career, part of the reason the Patriots were willing to let him go. But still, someone with playing that amount of snaps, if you're desperate, worth taking a shot at. Dennis Gardeck, surprisingly, had only played about 33% of the snaps last week. He played 33% of the snaps this week. I didn't see an injury, but then on Tuesday it was reported he tore his ACL, and he is out for the rest of the year, folks. So if you have Dennis Gardeck, Dynasty, if you have an IR spot, maybe you could throw him there. Otherwise, redraft, dump him, and find somebody else. Now, Julian Okwara and Jesse Lukita picked up a lot of the snaps. Lukita had about 47% of the snap share, and Lukita played about 35, 36% on the edge, but neither one is worth picking up, folks. So look somewhere else if you need a Gardeck replacement. Moving on to the 49ers, let's start in the secondary with Hufanga going on IR. Malik Mustafa had a great game. 12 tackles, 6 solo, and he delivered 2 hard hits. I mean, some really thunder bumpers. But at the same time, he also was the recipient of a thunder bumper from Patrick Mahomes when Mahomes scored that rushing touchdown. He leveled him pretty darn good. But so Malik Mustafa is not afraid to deliver the wood. And with Hufanga out, he is someone that you can definitely consider for your lineups. At the linebacker position for the 49ers, Devondre Campbell, his snap percentages have been coming down to 74%. He was someone that we talked about very early in the year to stay away from. I think the 49ers wasted their money paying for him. Nice solid veteran who is beyond his time at this point in time. Even D. Winters, a late round draft pick for the 49ers, cut into his time. Winters played 56% of the snaps in a combination of the number 3 linebacker and taking some of Campbell's snaps. Now, so Winters could be a stash for you for a few weeks. Don't forget Dre Greenlaw, who tore his Achilles in the Super Bowl, just running onto the field, coming out of a timeout, basically. He should be getting close to coming back potentially in the mid to late November time. So might be a situation to avoid in total, but don't be surprised if D. Winters picks up more Campbell snaps. Campbell's somebody I'm looking to see if you can snooker someone in a trade or drop him completely and get someone more productive on your team. On the Rams side now, they played 79 snaps on defense in week 7. That's a heck of a lot of snaps, folks. And despite all that, there was also talk this week too that coming out of the bye, the Rams were going to do something different at linebacker. No more Troy Reeder, no more Christian Roseboom, who have both really, unfortunately, sucked, according to, let's just call it experts. I'll just leave it at that. And Troy Reeder, his snap count down to 89%. Christian Roseboom, his snap count all the way down to 51%. On Tuesday, with the Rams playing Thursday night against the Vikings, practice reports come out on Tuesday for them. Well, there was one yesterday as well. Troy Reeder was listed as not participating in this, quote, walkthrough they had. They didn't have, I guess, a real practice, but he didn't even participate in that. Does this mean finally that Omar Speights, the undrafted rookie out of LSU, who had great kudos during the preseason, does he get his chance to go in for Troy Reeder? I've been preaching for a couple of weeks to pick him up and stash him on your bench, he being Speights. Go grab him right now if he's available, or put in a waiver claim for him. I'm not sure I'm playing him on Thursday if Reeder's out. I would want to see a week, but I would do that. The other thing with Roseboom all the way down to 51%, and with 51%, he only had 6 tackles and 2 solo when they had, once again, 79 snaps. Do we also see Jake Hummel move into the lineup as well? So 2 Rams linebackers to potentially target. Rummel's on the smaller side, but he also is had a little bit defensive background, might be able to cover better and space better than Roseboom. So will we see changes for the Rams? Possibly so. All right, pick them up. I'm telling you guys and gals. In the secondary, Tre'Davious White, unfortunately, he's had 2 significant injuries. He just hasn't got back to his old playing capability as a result of those major injuries. He's also getting up in age for a defensive back, for a cornerback specifically. He was actually ruled inactive. Cam Kinchin's only played 2 snaps again this week after basically being benched the week before. So in the secondary, Cam Curl moved up and played more of this closer to the box role more than he had been. Quentin Lake, for the second week in a row, played more of this deep safety role. Josh Wallace, undrafted free agent, ended up playing 49% of the snaps, and 80% of his 49% were in the slot, and he only had 1 pass defense. Jalen McCullough is some fool's gold. You might see, wow, if he's sort on points for this past week, particularly in big play leagues. He had 2 interceptions, but he only played 18 snaps. Only 4 of those were in the slot. He only had 1 other tackle. Don't chase the fool's gold, McCullough. Curl's the guy to chase right now. Don't give up on Lake because he was still productive even in that deep role. Part of the reason? The linebackers in front of him. So Curl, Lake, still very good plays. Let's go to the Seahawks and wrapping up the NFC. Rayshon Jenkins, the safety, went on IR. Everybody was expecting Kayvon Wallace to be the person to take his place, But voila, it was not Kayvon Wallace, folks. It was Kobe Bryant, the former cornerback. Yes, named after that Kobe, though spelled differently, Coby. And he was the starting safety. He was extremely productive. He played 92% of the snaps, 11 tackle, 7 solo, 1 pass defense. But 90% of his snaps were deep. 60 of his 67 snaps that he played were deep. I think we might have seen the high water mark for Kobe Bryant. At the same time, Julian Love has been playing a lot of deep snaps as well. Not nearly as much. 43 of his 66 were deep when they play a lot of 2 deep, sort of like when I was talking about with the Saints earlier and all. And Julian Love had 9 tackles, 4 which were solo, and a pass defense. So what does all this mean? Be careful about Kobe Bryant because he is definitely playing more deep safety than Julian Love is. Still can continue to play Julian Love, though. So that's what it means. And Tariq Woolen was ruled out at cornerback. Nehemiah Pritchett, the rookie from Auburn, took his spot and all. But Tariq Woolen should be back soon, so don't go chasing if you need in a cornerback league specific. Do not go chasing after Senior Pritchett. All right, let's move over to the AFC, folks, and we're going to start with the AFC East. The Bills' defense was on the field for 73 snaps. And Terrell Bernard, love the player, hate the injury proneness of him. Once again, he left the game for a period of time, came back in, then had an ankle injury, did not return. He had 8 tackles, 6 of which are solo, and 2 tackles for loss. So extremely productive player, but once again, can't stay on the field. Who replaced him? Balin Spector, who replaced him earlier this year. Spector put the green dot on, had 6 tackles, 4 of which were solo. You may have seen, if you looked at the box score, Nicholas Morrow, actually played a couple of snaps in mop-up time, but it was purely mop-up time because of the blowout against Tennessee. So Spector's the person to pick up if Bernard's out with his ankle injury. Spector was really productive, so he's worth throwing into your lineups, folks, if Bernard is out. Dorian Williams continues to be super efficient, even though he's playing, 75 to 80 to 85% of the snaps. He did play more this past week. But don't forget, at some point, Matt Milano's coming back, and they will defer the Feder. Now, is that December as they were hoping for? Is it January when it's basically NFL playoff time? But our fantasy football leagues and those playoffs are done. Still to be determined. Just keep that in mind related to Dorian Williams. Greg Rousseau, great first week with 3 sacks, and we've been, where's Greg Rousseau? Where's Greg Rousseau? Where's Greg Rousseau? Well, he played in about 75% of the snaps this week, and boy, did he have a great week. 5 tackles, 2 of which were solo, only half a sack. But if you get points for quarterback hits, he had 6 quarterback hits this past week. So great game for Rousseau. Whatever he had done in the first week, that light bulb came back on this past week. But with pass rushers and edge, it can be hit or miss from week to week. But Rousseau was one of my folks that I was so high on going into the season. I'm going to bet on the trend continuing, not necessarily 6 hits every week, 6 quarterback hits, but to have more frequent sacks and also a few more tackles each week. So love Rousseau if you can get him. The Dolphins, Emmanuel Ogbah, who has been fairly productive, was surprisingly inactive. So I did see in a couple of leagues where people had him in the starting lineup and was surprised when he was left out, and they ended up with a goose egg this past week. Keep an eye on the injury report to see what's going to happen with him this week. Jevon Holland was out because of a hand injury. Marcus May stepped in and did 100% of the snaps, had 5 tackles, 2 of which were solo. Not exactly mega productive and not someone that I'm necessarily chasing. On the linebacker front is where it gets a little bit interesting. David Long, who's been battling an injury, came back last week, and he and Anthony Walker the last week split the snaps 50-50. This week, David Long played 68%. Anthony Walker played 32%. Whichever of those two were in the lineup wore the green dot, but neither one was very productive. Now, they only did play 62 snaps, slightly less than a full game, but still, Long only had 4 tackles, 2 of which were solo. Anthony Walker only had 1 assisted tackle in that limited time. Jordan Brooks is actually the most reliable, even though he's not the green dot. He played 100% of the snaps. He did have 7 tackles, 5 of which were solo, threw in a pass defense, and one of those tackles was a tackle for loss. So out of all those guys right now, Jordan Brooks is the one to play. Now, maybe when Long gets back to both Health-wise, 100% and playing close to 100% of the snaps, then maybe you can put him back into your lineup. I'm not putting him in this week, folks. All right, over to the Jets. Hassan Reddick. Big news. He is coming back out of holdout. Supposedly he has a contract where he can make up for all those fines that he was getting, which was what I think 800,000 a week or some ridiculous amount of money. So anyway, we'll see what happens with Reddick. But the thing with Reddick to remember, folks, is that he's more of a pass rusher than a run stopper. And the Jets' biggest problem right now is in stopping the run versus rushing the passer. Will McDonald is playing over 60% of the snaps because it's more out of desperation because he's not a great edge setter and so that's not very good. So what kind of impact will Reddick have on the edge, and will that pull Will McDonald's snap count down and particularly take his sack count down, particularly because he's had sacks 3 games in a row? I don't know if that continues as Reddick keeps playing and gets more and more snaps as he ramps up. Thus, Will McDonald might be someone to trade high, particularly in dynasty leagues, folks. Okay, moving on to the safety situation. Chuck Clark was put on injured reserve. Jalen Mills, surprisingly, was the starter in Clark's place, played 95% of the snaps, or maybe it was 96% of the snaps, and was actually very productive. 8 tackles, 5 of which were solo, a tackle for loss, a pass defense, and 40% of the snaps were in the box. So while he's a little bit of elder statesman, Jalen Mills is someone to target for a cheap pickup at safety. At the other safety position, Tony Adams went out with a hamstring issue. Keep an eye out on the injury report. Ashton Davis goes in for him, gets a concussion. So then Isaiah Oliver, the converted cornerback who played with the Falcons last year, goes in and finishes up the game for the Jets at that safety position. Played about 76% of the snaps, had 3 tackles, 2 solo, not someone to chase. If I'm chasing a Jets safety, and if all these guys are injured, Jalen Mills, who's still technically on the practice squad, hasn't been elevated to the main roster, but still he'll probably be elevated again and will be in the lineup. If you see him elevated on before the game on Saturday, before the 4 p.m. Eastern time deadline, I'd feel good about putting him in my lineup. And then the Jets linebackers, folks. C.J. Mosley was not on the injury report. A couple weeks ago, he played less than 15% of the snaps as he was being eased back in. The linebacker coach, Mike Rutenberg, even talked about Jamin Sherwood would continue to wear the green dot as they continue to ease Mosley in again some more this week. He played a little bit over the 30% of the snaps. It was 32% this past week, did Mosley. But even when he was in there, now he was in the Mike position, but Sherwood still wore the green dot and called the plays. And that was when they were in 3 linebackers. When they went to 2 linebackers, Mosley went off the field, and it was Sherwood and Quincy Williams, who both basically played 100% of the snaps. Do we have a changing of the guards and they're just being respectful how they're kind of communicating this to the media and to us fans and so forth? And they're just doing that to be nice to Mosley? Possibility, folks, because Sherwood has been very productive. Mosley is 32-ish, so something to keep an eye on. But right now, I'm still putting Sherwood in my lineup, even if Mosley's active, until we see something different right now. Because Sherwood has been productive enough. Going on to the Patriots. Ugh, what a mess. Of course, Juwan Bentley went on IR earlier this year. Jelani Tavai moved into his spot, and let's just say he's been missing a tackle or 2, and he's been also burned in coverage. Tavai, once again, only played 85% of the snaps. Even with 85% of the snaps, you'd expect more than 1 solo tackle and 5 assisted tackles. Raekwon McMillan, who was missing a bunch of tackles as well, was all the way down to 18%. So who played linebacker? Christian Ellis, who was waived by the Eagles last year, picked up by the Patriots. He came in, he played, once again, a very nice 69% of the snaps is what he played. He had 9 tackles, 4 of which were solo. Now, he got burned in some coverage stuff as well that I was able to observe. But right now, it looks like it's Tavai and Christian Ellis, and I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes Christian Ellis over Tavai. It's pretty bad. Kyle Duggar, the safety, has been playing a lot closer to the box. He played 87% of the snaps in the box, folks, and he wore the green dot. So no confidence in the Patriots linebackers overall. But Jabril Peppers, okay, that's tough to say, folks. I didn't realize that. But with him having his legal challenges, quote unquote, Marte Mapu happened to come off an injured reserve at a beautiful time. He has played basically 100% of the snaps both weeks. He played 73% closer to the line of scrimmage and only 27% deep. Now, granted, they were playing Jacksonville, and Jacksonville, I think, ran on that one drive, 14 plays in a row they ran the football. That obviously probably skewed some of these stats of both Duggar and Mapu this past week. But Mapu's been pretty productive and all. So, and he was well thought of, just came out of a small school when he was drafted in the third round a year ago. So Mapu is someone to potentially stash deep on your bench. I kind of like Mapu there. Lastly, with the Patriots, Anthony Jennings played a season-high 82% of the snaps on the line. He had 7 tackles, 6 solo, 1 tackle for loss. He's not going to get you the big play stats. But if he's playing those kind of stats and it's more a tackle-heavy kind of league as opposed to rewarding for big plays like sacks and interceptions, Anthony Jennings, someone to add to your roster, folks, in a deeper league. Okay, let's move on to the AFC North, and let's go to the Bengals, folks. Geno Stone, who they signed as a free agent away from the intra-division Ravens. He played 88% of the snaps. He left the game early with an injury. Word on the street is that he is expected to play this week. Jordan Battle has continued, though, and he would be the one. Jordan Battle would first go there. He would be playing if Geno Stone is out. So first thing to watch. Stone's role hasn't been that productive, though, so not sure I'm rushing to pick up Battle. The thing that's intriguing about Battle, though, is he continues to take a series or two away each game away from Von Bell. Von Bell only played 83% of the snaps this past week, and Jordan Battle ended up playing 23%, part for Bell, as I was saying, and part for Stone. Bell was re-signed as a veteran, but as I've mentioned in previous broadcasts, there's a reason the Panthers were willing to let Von Bell go back. Great communicator, great veteran, all that kind of stuff, but the productivity and losing a step is an issue. So as the season progresses, watch for Battle to replace Von Bell. Unless Stone's injury is more serious, then that could be a different situation. On to the Browns. Ronnie Hickman goes on IR this past week before the game started. Good news is that Juan Thornhill, who is the typical starting safety and usually plays more of a deep role, came off of IR. However, they did not put the full workload on Thornhill. He only played, let's see here, 49% of the snaps. So they looked like they eased him back in. And the reason I say that too is that linebacker Jordan Hicks, who was coming back from injury, he was eased back in and only played 60% of the snaps. So Thornhill alternated with Rodney McLeod. Jordan Hicks alternated with Mohamed Diabate. I'm not sure, I probably butchered that name. And so I expect as the week progresses, as we get into this next week and both get a little bit more healthy, Hicks starts getting more into the 80% range. Thornhill gets closer to his typical 90%, but not in a role that we want to play from an IDP perspective. So Hicks will become playable in much deeper leagues. As the year progressed, Hicks was expected to be the green dot. JOK, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, has been wearing the green dot, wore the green dot this past week. Expect that to continue, particularly, and expect Hicks not to play 100% of the snaps, which has been consistent with a Browns number 2 linebacker, as Schwartz has not played a second linebacker a significant percent of snaps in the past couple of years. On the Ravens side of things, we talked about how little the Bucs played on defense. Well, the Ravens played 83 snaps on defense. That's a lot of snaps. That's about 30% of a game, folks. So basically, let's just call it about 1 1/3 games is what the Ravens defense played. And that certainly helped Roquan Smith to get 18 tackles, 11 which were solo, and Kyle Hamilton get 11 tackles, 7 which were solo, and throw in a pass defense, which he got on that last drive. Trenton Simpson only played 62% of the snaps from a linebacker, a trend that's continued. So Trenton Simpson is not someone you can feel good about playing. He did get 8 tackles, 5 of which were solo in a pass defense. But once again, all that extra playing time contributed into that. Don't chase it. Trenton Simpson, not someone to put into your lineup. Lastly, in the AFC North, the Steelers, they only played 57 snaps on defense as well. Alex Highsmith returned to the lineup and played 74% of the snaps, so great to see him back. But the more interesting thing for the Steelers is at the inside linebacker positions. Patrick Queen played 98% of the snaps, but once again, sort of like we were talking about with Bobby Okereke, Patrick Queen is on a freaking milk carton for those that remember the days when they used to put kids on milk carton. Where help to find my kid kind of thing. Where in the world is Patrick Queen? He's on the field, but 4 tackles and 1 solo. Granted, only 57 snaps, but still, he is just not producing at all. Someone similar to Okereke, I'm probably putting on my bench, folks. On the other hand, Payton Wilson is now up to 54% of the snaps. He had 10 tackles and 4 of those being solo. But boy, those are hyper efficient stats. So the more he plays, I still don't expect him to be quite that efficient per se, but he will get a decent amount of tackles if he continues that trend and as his snaps go up. Landon Roberts was all the way down to 28% of snaps, folks, and he had no snaps. I had to double check the box score twice. I'm like, okay, wait. Nothing? Okay. The changing of the guard is beginning. Go grab Payton Wilson before it's too late. And who knows if Queen continues to be this inefficient, maybe we see more Wilson and Roberts. But for now, it's Queen with all the money he played, and Wilson taking off of Roberts' plate and playing more and more as time progresses. All right, folks, let's move to the AFC South and let's talk about the Colts. For those of y'all that have been watching these shows, and by the way, shout out to my partner, Nathan Cheatham. I meant to do that at the beginning. He's usually my co-host and all. Unfortunately, I had a personal situation that came up shortly before the show. He will be back with me next week, and you won't have to hear just me talking and all as I ramble through and try and give you all this information in about an hour's time from across the league. Back to the Colts. When Anthony Richardson plays quarterback, the offense doesn't play a lot of snaps, which means the defense plays a lot of snaps. The Colts defense played a very nice 69 snaps this past week. Now, that's an improvement because other games where Richardson was playing quarterback, they're playing 80 and 90 snaps. But still, 69 snaps is more than a typical game, and that's going to impact some of these linebacker stats we'll talk about shortly. So EJ Speed had an injury, was limited on Wednesday, limited on Thursday, full practice on Friday. All of a sudden gets changed from questionable to doubtful on Saturday, then ends up not playing. A lot of people speculated. If you listen to me, though, I called it. Jalen Carleys was the man that was the rookie draft pick, was drafted as a defensive back, moved to linebacker position. He's been playing the third linebacker role. He was the one that was more like Speed in terms of backfilling him. Olubi's more of a Mike, more of a Zaire Franklin replacement, potentially if Franklin were to be hurt. But anyway, Carleys ended up starting for Speed, got off to a terrific start. 5 solo tackles, gets a quarterback sack, and then gets hurt. Not only does he get hurt, reports after the game was that he was in a walking boot on crutches, and now the right before recording this, I read that he is a potential to go on IR. So if EJ Speed is not back, and when Carleys was hurt, the man they went to once again was not Segun Olubi. It was Grant Stewart, the former 7th-round pick, and I want to say he might have been Mr. Irrelevant if I remember correctly. And boy, did he have a showing with, 19 tackles, 11 solo, 1 tackle for loss. And he ended up playing 93% of the snaps. The reason he played 93% was that he was playing that number 3 linebacker position first. And then when Carleys went out, then he took over as a number 2 linebacker. So if Speed is out and Carleys is definitely going to be out, Stewart would be the person to pick up. Don't spend a ton of money on Fab. Speed could end up playing this particular week, so you could waste a lot of money. Or even if he doesn't, chances are he's not going to miss this week and next week, so you might be paying a lot of money for Stewart. And depending on what happens with the Colts, as we see them slowing down things on the offense to help the defense, and once again down from 80 and 90 snaps on defense to 69 this past week, be careful about Stewart. Don't spend a ton of money. When I say money, fab budget. Zaire Franklin played 100% of the snaps, got 16 tackles, 5 of which were solo, 11 assisted. Not ideal, but once again, Franklin putting up some IDP stats for us that help us in our lineups. At the safety position, Julian Blackman played 64 of the 69 snaps deep. Nick Cross played 52 of 69 deep. So very interesting where Cross had been playing more in a box role. They played a lot more too deep in this past game. So what does that mean? Both of them, ironically, had identical stat lines with 9 tackles, 5 of which were solo. Cross is still the preferred play over Blackman right now, which unfortunately I was incorrect on the beginning of the year, but that's okay. Cross, if you got him, keep playing him. Blackman, I'm still comfortable playing him. At the edge position, not a lot to talk about. Kwity Paye was back, playing his normal about mid 60% of snaps, as did Ode Ingbo and as did Latu. Latu is the only thing that any of those three that really did anything in the box score with 3 tackles, 2 of which were solo. Got his second sack of his career in that game. Boy, I tell you what, disappointing Kwity Paye. Deo Adingbo, I was hoping would be a potential breakout as well. Just didn't happen this year, folks. So Latu is probably the only one rostering at this point. I might keep Paye in deeper leagues, but he's on my bench. I'm not playing him. Moving over to the Jaguars. Foye Oluokun was still not activated off IR. Doug Peterson has said he could come back for week 7, which he didn't, or week 8, which there's a possibility that he will because he was designated to return from IR, which gives him 21 days. I think most people wear that, but just to be sure. So even though he's been activated to begin practicing, he may not be activated off the IR for this Sunday. Keep an eye on that. If Oluokun is, I'm absolutely putting him into my lineup. Now, earlier this year, there was a lot of rotation going on between Oluokun, Devin Lloyd, Ventrell Miller, who's been hyper efficient on the percent of snaps he's played, in terms of hyper efficient in terms of stats, and then Chad Muma. Muma seems like he's fallen by the wayside. As this past week, Lloyd played 97% of the snaps. Miller only played 58%. Muma played 38%, but that's significantly lower. And Muma only had 1 tackle. It was a solo one. But Ventrell Miller, at 58% of the snaps, very efficient, 10 tackles and 6 solo. However, if Oluokun's back and with the pressure the Jags are under, I can't see a ton of rotation happening. Maybe they do ease Oluokun back in a little bit if he is made active, and so you do see Ventrell Miller some, but I think Muma falls off the plate completely. And by week 9, I think Oluokun's back at 100%. So I hope you enjoyed Ventrell Miller, but once again, if you can find a sucker to potentially buy high on it, give it a whirl. At the safety position, Antonio Johnson, the rookie who had been starting most of the year and playing 100% of the snaps, only 32% of the snaps. So what happened in the Jags secondary? Tyson Campbell gets activated off of IR. So now they have Campbell and Darby on the outside. Savage had been playing the slot. They moved Jerry Jones, the rookie, into the slot. Savage moves to his natural safety role. So he's back there with Andre Cisco. What does that mean for Antonio Johnson? To the bench. 32% of the snaps. So he played a little bit third safety role, and that was about it for him. So Antonio Johnson, if you can find someone to take him on, great. But look, Darnell Savage is not that great of a safety. Hasn't been that great for IDP for years. He only had playing 100% of the snaps, by the way, 3 tackles, 2 of which were solo. Not that great. So could Antonio Johnson eventually replace Savage again, even though he was the free agent acquisition? Potentially, and that's even more potentially. Boy, lots of potentialities there. If the Jags continue to struggle and they go ahead and put some of the younger guys in and look to get rid of veterans and get ready for next year. Let's move to the Texans. They only played 58 snaps against those Packers on defense. Christian Harris was still not activated from IR at the linebacker position. The 2 starting linebackers, Azeez Al-Shaair with a knee injury, Henry Toto with a concussion, neither got put on IR, but both were ruled out and did not play. In their absence, Neville Hewitt, the special teams veteran, and Jake Hansen both played 100% of the snaps. Hewitt had 9 tackles, 6 of which were solo with 2 pass defenses. Jake Hansen had 7 tackles, 4 solo, 1 tackle for loss. If either Al-Shaair or Toto, if only one of them comes back, I expect Hewitt to continue to play, with Hansen being the odd man out. If it's Toto, I still expect Hewitt to play the Mike and Toto the will position or the number 2 linebacker position. If it's Al-Shaair and not Toto, I expect Al-Shaair to put the green dot back on and Hewitt to play that number 2 linebacker spot. That's my bet. That's what I'm banking on. I like to use the term fool's gold periodically in terms of referring to someone who had a great week. Tim Settle had his second great week of the year. I think it was either the first or second week of the year. He had another fantastic week. Settle ended up having 4 tackles and a sack and 2 tackles for loss, including that 1 sack. So a great week, but he's more of a nose tackle type, not someone to go and chase. The other thing, too, related to the defensive line, Danico Autry played 48% of the snaps as he was activated after the 6-week suspension. So he got eased back in with 48% of the snaps there. And so he is someone to keep an eye on. And once again, deeper leagues, definitely someone I'm looking to stash potentially in, particularly if he has a defensive tackle designation and you require a defensive tackle to be on your team. D'Angelo Ross played 100% of the snaps at cornerback in the absence of Kwame Lassiter. Don't talk a ton about cornerbacks unless they're slots. The only reason I'm bringing him up is that they targeted the crud out of him and they picked on him. They didn't go at Stingley very much, although Stingley did get targeted and he did get 6 tackles, but Ross got targeted a lot. So big step down from Lassiter. You'd prefer to avoid Stingley. So Ross, if Lassiter is out, if you're desperate, and particularly in a tackle-heavy league and tackle-heavy scoring for your cornerbacks, someone to potentially pick up for a week's play. On the Titans side of things, Kenneth Murray exited the game a couple of different times. He only played 78% of the snaps. Keep an eye on injury reports. Want to see what happens there. Jack Gibbons is the person that came in and played the other 22% of the snaps and took on the green dot while Murray was out. It did not go over to Ernest Jones, who they acquired from the Rams and who, of course, wore the green dot with the Rams last year. So just keep that in mind that if Murray's out, Jack Gibbons will probably play 100% of the snaps, which both Murray and Jones have been doing most of the year. So once again, if you have injury problems, if you need some sort of filler, if Murray's out, Jack Gibbons can maybe give you 8, 9 tackles, maybe with 5 or so solo, 3 or 4 assisted, some along those lines. He could be someone to play. Jeffrey Simmons, I continue to be worried about, as I've talked about on these shows since we found out that he had that Tommy John elbow surgery with defensive linemen and trying to do swim moves and engage and things along those lines. Having that brace and that limited mobility from that surgery, I worry about. So he came back. He had in week 6, checking my notes to make sure I have this correctly, he had only 3 tackles, which solo and 1 tackle for loss. He did play a surprising 80% of the snaps in that first week back after the bye. This week he played only 73% of the snaps. Now, granted, the game was a blowout, but even in that, he only had 2 tackles, one of which was solo. He did get a pass defense and he did get a quarterback hit. But he's playing. But boy, I am worried about their injury. And so there's someone that loves Jeffrey Simmons out there, different for Dynasty, but for redraft, I'm looking to potentially trade him. I just do not feel good about that Tommy John surgery. That's probably the last time I bring it up, but beware. Okay, let's go to the AFC West, folks, in our last division. And there's not nearly as much to talk about in this division, which was interesting. Let's talk about the Broncos, who absolutely, once again, destroyed my Saints. Have I mentioned that previously on this show? Cody Barton played 100% of the snaps at linebacker. Of course, Alex Singleton went on IR. The big shocker was I'm watching on the field and I see number 12 and I'm like, wait, was it number 12 or number 5? Now it's slipping my mind. But I was like, oh my gosh, who is that? And it was Quan Alexander, who was on the practice squad, who they called up, put him into the starting lineup. And he played more snaps at that number 2 linebacker position than Justin Sternard during the first half. And the second half it flipped. And Sternard played significantly more snaps than Alexander. In total, Sternard played 60% of the snaps. Alexander played 30% of the snaps. It is something to keep an eye on. Sternard did end up putting up good stats against the Saints, but remember, it was Rattler and backup quarterback and lots of little short dump-offs and bad running plays because of banged-up O-line the Saints had. So Sternard did put up good stats. However, watch for Quan Alexander to potentially play more this week, particularly if Quan Alexander gets signed to the 53-man roster. I would go and grab Quan Alexander, and I'm certainly not starting Justin Sternad, who is more known for his special teams play than his play on defense. On the Chargers side of things, they only played 57 snaps in the game against the Cardinals, but they had that dreaded three-headed monster with all the linebackers active again. We know we don't like three-headed monsters on running backs like what we're seeing with Tampa Bay, although luckily they had 80-some snaps on offense and did a bunch of dump downs once Evans and Godwin were hurt, during the game, so they dumped off a lot to the running backs. But we don't like three-headed monsters. Back to the linebackers. Same thing. Junior Colson, Dayon Henley, Denzel Perryman, all three played. Henley played the most with 81% of the snaps, Perryman at 58%, Colson at 54%. But none of them had great stats. Part of it because of snap count, part of it because they weren't on the field a lot. The Chargers run that, remember, slow, methodical offense as well. Running game takes a lot of time off of the clock. So these linebackers, ooh, boy, I tell you what, don't feel good for productivity overall as the year progresses between the rotations and what the offense does. I mean, Henley had 4 tackles, 4 of which were solo in the pass defense, not much. Denzel Perryman, 3 tackles, 1 of which was solo, 1 pass defense. Colson, 4 tackles, 2 solo. That's not going to win you championships, folks. Keep them all out of your lineup. If you're desperate, put Henley in, but he would be the only one at this point in time. But no, don't expect top-tier numbers for him. Moving on to the Chiefs, the only thing really to talk about is that Mike Dana was ruled out before the game. That's about it. Their defense is playing phenomenal. Well, I will say Watson, the cornerback, I'm sorry, did hurt his ankle, did get put on IR. So let's talk about that live because I didn't prepare for this, but that just hit me. With Watson going on IR, they had Nazeeh Johnson on there. They had Roland hyphenated somebody out there who I don't even know who that is. So that's just not good. They're going to be hurting a cornerback. We did see Chamari Connor playing some snaps earlier this year in the slot position. And they were doing some rotation at safety as well with Connor and Reed and with Cook and all. You might have seen that Jaden Hicks did get his first interception as well, but he didn't play a whole lot of snaps. Something to keep an eye on how this plays out. But I could see McDuffie at one corner. I could see a rotation of a bunch of folks at another corner. I could see Connor moving into that slot corner position, and he has a safety designation, which would be really, really good for Connor. And then seeing Reed and Cook at safeties. And if they do bring in a third safety when they pull that third linebacker off potentially, that's where Jaden Hicks might come into play. Probably not enough snaps to make him worthy of playing, but in a dynasty league, then probably makes him worth picking up. On to the Raiders, our last team to wrap this up. Max Crosby was back to 100% of the snaps after not doing that the past 2 weeks because of that high ankle sprain. Now, is he 100%? Probably not, but he played 100% of the snaps. And of course, he did get a sack, and he did get a pass defense as well, if you saw that. Devon Diablo, since he returned these past couple of weeks, both weeks he has played more than 90% of the snaps, which hasn't always been the case with the Raiders. Good news for Diablo, and with their offense and the way the Raiders are, that could bode well for him for getting some IDP stats. So Diablo is someone worth picking up and or playing, depending on your situation. Lastly, Nate Hobbs. Last week I talked about the fact that he played primarily on the outside, didn't play any slot. Well, guess what? This past week he only played the 48 snaps that he played. Once again, the Raiders only played 55 snaps on defense, much lower than typical 65. But he only played 48 snaps of those 55. Of those, only 2 were outside cornerback. The rest were a slaughter in the box. So what it looks like is in games where they're playing teams that play a lot of 11 personnel, he is playing in the slot. You want to get him in your lineup when he does that. Teams where they're not a lot of 11 personnel, such as a Chargers team that plays a lot of multiple tight ends, you do not want to play Nate Hobbs. He'll be playing on the outside. So that's the way to play Hobbs. And looking back and forth, it's been a lot of slot, not a lot of slot, a lot of slot, not a lot of slot. We do love slot, folks, but make sure they're playing slot. And so Nate Hobbs, that's what to watch out for if the team is playing a lot of 11 personnel. And that's true for a lot of these cornerbacks that don't play 100% of the snaps. If they're playing teams with 11 personnel, a lot of 11 personnel that they play, get them out there. Someone like the Seahawks, for example, that play a lot of Metcalf, Lockett, and Smith and Jigma. That wraps us up, folks. We're going to call it a wrap here. Sorry, I went a little bit over an hour. I'm not going to do the outro because I screwed up the intro and it played almost twice. We're not going to do that to screw that up and bore you. IDP Plus, you can see on the screen. Hopefully you've been noticing as you've been watching me. 20% off with the promo code PROPS. Go and check us out. We have some incredible tools. We have some incredible writers. Check out our YouTube channel. Obviously, this is on our fantasy channel. We also have a props channel, which is making people a lot of money. We also have props written content as well, which is making people a lot of money. It's fantastic. We also have a shorts channel where some of this stuff is being abbreviated for you. Check that out as well. We're very proud of the team that we have. We have a fantastic team, and you can learn a lot, and we can help you bring home some championships, whether it be just offense, just IDP, or offense and IDP. For my co-host Nathan Cheatham, who couldn't join me today, who's at Nate Cheat, I'm at Ricky Rod 66. Be nice to everybody, be kind to everybody, and go win this weekend. Let's go win some championships. Take care, everybody. Join us at IDP Plus. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.